Nobody warned Zara Collins that the most dangerous man in Seoul would one day fall asleep holding her hand. And honestly, nobody warned him either. But that's exactly what happened. And if you want to know how a black girl from Atlanta ended up in the kitchen of a Korean Mafia boss at 2 in the morning making jollof rice with a gun on the counter, you need to stay right here. Don't move, don't skip, because this story is going to ruin you in the best possible way. And when it's over, hit that like button and subscribe, because we drop stories like this every single week, and you deserve to be here for all of them. Now, let's talk about Kwon Ji-young. Kwon Ji-young was 32 years old, disgustingly handsome, and completely, catastrophically unable to sleep. Not a little bit of insomnia. Not the kind where you scroll your phone until 1 a.m. and then knock out. No, we're talking 4, sometimes 5 days without a single hour of real sleep. His doctor had tried everything: melatonin, prescription medication, white noise machines. One man even suggested he tried journaling, and Ji-young had looked at him with such cold, dead eyes that the doctor apparently never brought it up again. The problem was simple, in the way that impossible things are always described as simple. Kwon Ji-young's brain did not know how to stop. It ran 24 hours a day, like a server that had never been shut down, processing threats, calculating moves, reviewing everything that could go wrong and everything that already had. He was the head of the Kwon organization, one of the most feared crime syndicates in the country. And fear, it turned out, was not a thing you could clock out of at the end of the day. Fear followed you home. Fear sat at the edge of your bed and watched you stare at the ceiling. Fear did not care that you had a silk pillow and a view of the Han River. His men were terrified of him. His enemies were more terrified. Even his cat, a fat Persian named Soju, had learned to read the room and would relocate to a different part of the penthouse whenever Ji-young walked in looking like he hadn't slept, which was always, which meant Soju basically lived in the bathroom now. He had tried everything too. Different beds, different apartments, a trip to Jeju that lasted exactly 1 night before he came back, because lying on a beach listening to waves just gave him more time to think. He'd tried acupuncture. He'd tried hypnotherapy. He'd tried, and this one is important, a private chef. Not Zara. Not yet. Before Zara, there had been a rotating cast of the most celebrated chefs in Seoul, each one hired with the hope that warm food at the right hour might coax his body into something resembling rest. None of them lasted. One quit because Ji-young ate in complete silence and it made her nervous. Another was let go after he told the head of his security detail that the man's doenjang jjigae tasted like regret. The third one, and this is the part that people still whispered about, the third one had accidentally oversalted the rice, and Ji-young had simply stood up from the table, walked to the window, and said nothing for so long that the chef had quietly packed his knives and left of his own accord. So when Zara Collins arrived at the front door of the Kwon penthouse on a Tuesday evening in October with a rolling suitcase, a cast-iron skillet wrapped in a dish towel, and the kind of energy that suggested she had absolutely no idea what she was walking into, the head of security, a man named Park Young-jun, who had seen genuinely frightening things in his life, felt something he hadn't felt in years. Concern. Not for Ji-young, for her. Zara was 27. She had grown up in Atlanta, trained in Paris, worked in New York, and had somehow ended up in Seoul after her best friend Amara got married to a Korean-American architect and told her, and this is a direct quote, "Girl, just come. The food scene here will change your life." Amara had been right about many things over the years. She had been spectacularly right about this. Zara had spent 3 years building a reputation in Seoul's culinary underground. She wasn't famous. She didn't have a restaurant. What she had was a very specific skill, which was the ability to cook food that made people feel something. Not just satisfied, not just full. Something. A memory. A softness. the particular comfort of being taken care of. Her regular clients included a retired judge who cried every time she made her grandmother's sweet potato pie, a K-pop producer who said her jerk chicken had given him the best creative session of his career, and now, apparently, through a referral chain so complicated she'd stopped trying to trace it, Kwon Ji-young. She had been told almost nothing about him. Rich, private, particular about food, struggled to sleep. That was it. She had not been told about the organization. She had not been told about the 3 previous chefs. She had not been told about the gun that would be sitting on the kitchen counter on her first night, which she would later describe to Amara as a choice. Park Young-joon opened the door and looked at her. She looked back. "Hi," she said. "I'm the chef." He stepped aside without a word. The penthouse was extraordinary, and also somehow deeply sad, in the way that spaces without warmth always are. Everything was expensive, nothing was personal. There were no photographs, no mismatched mugs, no stack of takeout menus held to the fridge with a magnet shaped like something stupid and beloved. Just clean lines and cold light, and the distant sound of Seoul at night far below. Ji-young was standing at the floor-to-ceiling window when she came in, his back to her, in a dark shirt with his sleeves rolled up, which Zara clocked immediately, and then immediately told herself was not relevant information. He didn't turn around. "You're late," he said. "By 4 minutes," she said. "Traffic." Now he turned around. He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at most things, with a kind of flat, measuring assessment, like he was deciding what category to file her in. She looked back at him the way she had decided in the elevator she was going to look at him, which was normally, because she was a professional, and she was here to cook food, and whatever this man's deal was, it was not her business. "The last chef," he said, "left in the middle of a meal." "I don't do that," she said. "The one before that oversalted the rice." "I won't do that either." He was quiet for a moment. "Can you make anything with gochujang?" She tilted her head. "Can I make anything with gochujang? Sir, I have made gochujang work inside a dessert. Please don't come from my range." Something moved across his face. It wasn't quite a smile. It was the memory of a smile, like a muscle that had forgotten it could do that. "The kitchen is through there," he said. The first night she made him dakgalbi, slow and careful, with the kind of attention to the char on the cabbage that told you she actually cared about what she was doing. She set it on the table, stepped back, and watched him eat. He ate in silence. She had been warned about this. She stood in the kitchen doorway and did not fill the silence with noise, because she had learned a long time ago that silence was not always uncomfortable. Sometimes it was just quiet. Sometimes quiet was exactly what a person needed and didn't know how to ask for. He finished. He set down his chopsticks. "Good," he said. Coming from him, she would later understand, this was essentially a standing ovation. She came back the next night, and the one after that. The arrangement was dinner at 9, sometimes a small late-night dish around midnight if he was still awake, which he always was. She learned quickly what he liked. Clean flavors, nothing fussy. He had no patience for food that was trying too hard, which she thought said something interesting about him, but again, not her business. They didn't talk much at first. He would eat, she would cook and clean, and then she would leave. But somewhere around the second week, things started to shift. It started because of the music. Zara cooked with music, always had. It was part of her process, the rhythm of it, the way a good song could set the pace for how you moved around a kitchen. She kept it low, earphones usually, but one night she'd forgotten them and she'd put on a playlist through her phone's speaker without thinking, and the opening notes of Burna Boy's Last had drifted out of the kitchen and into the living room where Ji-young was sitting with a glass of whiskey and what appeared to be an extremely boring financial document. He didn't say anything. She didn't notice he'd heard. But the next night, when she came in, there was a small Bluetooth speaker sitting on the kitchen counter. She stared at it. She looked at Park Young-joon, who was standing near the door. He looked at the ceiling. She put on her playlist. That was the first night Ji-young came and stood in the kitchen doorway while she cooked, glass of whiskey in hand, watching her work. He didn't say why. She didn't ask. She just turned the music up a little and kept chopping. "What is this?" he asked after a few minutes. "Fela Kuti," she said. He was quiet. Then, "It sounds like an argument." "It is an argument. He's arguing with an entire corrupt government. Through music." Another pause. "Did he win?" She looked up at him. "He never stopped fighting. That's its own kind of winning." He considered this with the gravity of a man considering a geopolitical situation. Then he nodded, once, and went back to the living room. Zara stood there for a second. Then she smiled to herself and went back to her fish. By week 3, he was sitting at the kitchen island while she cooked. She had not invited him. He had simply appeared there one night, on the stool on the other side of the counter, like a very large, very intimidating houseplant that had relocated itself. She had looked at him. He had looked at the cutting board. She had handed him a piece of plantain to try, mostly to give herself something to do with her hands. He chewed it slowly. His eyes did something complicated. "What is this?" "Fried plantain." "It tastes like..." He stopped. "Like what?" He was quiet for a long moment. "My mother used to make something sweet. When I was very small. I don't remember what it was." He looked at the piece of plantain still in his hand. "It tastes like almost remembering something." Zara put down her knife. That was the thing about food. That was always the thing. You could build walls everywhere else. You could make your face into a mask and your voice into a weapon and your whole life into something armored and untouchable. But food went around all of that. Food went straight to the place in you that was still small and still hungry and still hoping someone would take care of you. Every time, without exception. She slid the whole plate of plantain across the counter toward him and said nothing. He ate every piece. That night, when she was cleaning up around midnight, she heard something she hadn't heard before from the living room. She stuck her head out. Ji-young was asleep, sitting upright on the couch, head tipped back slightly, glass of whiskey still loosely in his hand, completely and utterly unconscious. She stood there for a second. Then she very carefully walked over, removed the glass from his hand, set it on the coffee table, and went back to the kitchen to finish cleaning. Park Young-joon materialized from somewhere. He looked at his boss sleeping on the couch. He looked at Zara. His expression was completely unreadable, but his eyes were doing something that looked, if she wasn't mistaken, a lot like relief. "How long has it been?" she asked quietly. "Since he slept?" He paused. "Properly? Months." She nodded. She gathered her things. She left. She told herself it wasn't her business. She told herself she was a chef, and she had made good food, and the food had relaxed someone who needed relaxing, and that was the job, done, full stop. She told herself this approximately 40 times on the drive home. She was back the next evening at 9. He was waiting in the kitchen. Not the living room. The kitchen. Standing near the island, and from the expression on his face, this was not a casual choice, and he was not happy about it, which meant he had stood there and decided to do it anyway, which she found she didn't know what to do with. "You moved the whiskey glass," he said. "It was going to fall. You covered me with a blanket." She opened her mouth, closed it. It was cold. He looked at her. She looked at him. The kitchen was very quiet. "I slept for 6 hours," he said. She felt something warm move through her chest, which she immediately tried to suppress. "That's good. I haven't slept 6 hours consecutively in over a year." "Okay. I'm not saying it was the food. I know. It probably wasn't the food. Probably not." He picked up the Bluetooth speaker from the counter and handed it to her. "Put on your music," he said. She put on her music. The next few weeks were, in ways that Zara found deeply inconvenient, the best weeks she'd had in years. She cooked, he sat nearby, and something about the combination of his presence and her food and the music and the particular quality of the silence between them had started to feel like something she didn't have a professional category for. She made him agusi soup one night and watched him look at the bowl for a full 30 seconds before he picked up the spoon. "It looks like it shouldn't work," he said. "A lot of things look like they shouldn't work," she said. He looked up at her. She looked at her cutting board. He ate the agusi soup. He ate all of the agusi soup. He asked quietly if there was more. There was more. She also, in the interest of full disclosure, made him try Puff Puff one night, and his reaction to Puff Puff was genuinely one of the top 5 things Zara had ever witnessed. He'd eaten the first one with his usual composed skepticism. Then he'd eaten the second one slightly faster. By the fourth one, he was eating them directly from the bowl she'd set out on the counter, standing up, without chopsticks, without any of the careful, dignified distance he carried everywhere, and she had turned around from the stove to find the head of one of Seoul's most feared criminal organizations standing in her kitchen eating Puff Puff like a man who had finally found something worth caring about. She had laughed. Actually laughed, not politely, but the real kind, the kind that comes out before you can stop it. He froze. Then, slowly, like something he'd forgotten how to do, he smiled. A real one. Not the ghost of one. An actual, full, reluctant, devastating smile. She turned back to the stove immediately because she needed approximately 10 to 15 business days to process what she had just seen. It was around this time that she found out about the organization. She hadn't asked. She wasn't stupid. She had figured out early on that Park Young-jun was not just a personal assistant, that the men who occasionally appeared at the door were not friends dropping by, that the conversations Ji-young sometimes had in clipped, cold Korean on the phone were not business calls in any ordinary sense of the word. She had put things together quietly and decided, in the way she decided most things, to address it directly. She had waited until he was sitting at the kitchen island one night, and she had set down the knife she was using, and she had said, without drama, "Tell me what I've gotten myself into." He had looked at her for a long moment. She thought he might deflect. She thought he might do the thing people with power always did, which was act as if the question itself was the problem. Instead, he told her. Not everything, but enough. The organization. What it controlled. What it cost. He told it plainly, without apology, watching her face the whole time like he was waiting for something. She listened. When he was finished, she was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Is anyone going to come for me?" "No," he said. "I won't allow it." "Are you sure?" "I am certain." She thought about this. Then she picked the knife back up. "Okay," she said. He stared at her. "Okay?" "I heard what you said. I've decided to keep cooking." "Okay." "Most people, I'm not most people." She looked up briefly. "And you already knew that, or you wouldn't have told me the truth." He had no response to this, which was, she was beginning to understand, the highest compliment he knew how to give. It was on a Thursday, 5 weeks in, that everything shifted for real. She had come in to find him in a state she hadn't seen before. Not angry, not cold, just hollow, in a way that alarmed her more than the anger ever could. He was sitting in the dark of the living room, and when she turned on the kitchen light, he didn't even react, just sat there looking at nothing. She didn't say anything. She went to the kitchen and started cooking. She made her grandmother's recipe that night, the one she kept in her head and her hands and nowhere else. Oxtail stew, slow and rich, the kind that took 3 hours and couldn't be rushed, which meant she was in his kitchen well past midnight. And somewhere around hour 2, the smell had done what smells do, and she heard him get up from the couch. He stood in the kitchen doorway. He looked wrecked in the specific way that strong people look when they've been carrying something too heavy for too long, and the weight has started to show. "Sit down," she said, not unkindly, just clearly. He sat down. She put a bowl in front of him. She sat down on the other side of the counter with her own bowl, because she hadn't eaten yet, and she wasn't going to stand there watching him like a waitress. They ate. The music was low. Outside, Seoul glittered. After a while, she said, You don't have to tell me anything. He nodded. But if you want to, she said, I'm not going anywhere. The silence after that was different from all the other silences. It was the kind that means someone is deciding whether to trust you, and the decision is not small, and it costs something to make it. I lost someone, he said finally. A long time ago. Today was the anniversary. She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't say it would get better. She didn't say any of the things people said because they needed to fill the space with something. She said, what were they like? And he told her. Quietly, slowly, like someone pulling something carefully out of a deep place. His younger brother, 12 years ago. A consequence of the life Ji-young had already chosen by then, which meant it was a weight he had been carrying alone for 12 years. Because who do you tell? Who holds that for you when you are what he was? Zara listened. She didn't move away. She didn't perform sympathy. She just stayed right there on the other side of the counter and let him talk. And when he finally stopped, she reached across and put her hand over his and left it there. He looked at her hand. He didn't move. The kitchen clock said 2:17 in the morning. I'm tired, he said. He didn't mean it the way people said it when they needed to sleep. He meant the other tired, the one that went all the way down. I know, she said. I don't know how to stop, he said. You don't have to stop everything, she said. You just have to stop for tonight. She moved around to the couch with him. She didn't make a thing of it. She just sat down beside him, and he leaned back, and she didn't move away. And somewhere between one breath and the next, Kwon Ji-young, the most feared man in 3 districts of Seoul, fell asleep. He fell asleep with her hand in his. She sat very still. She thought about Atlanta and Paris and New York and how none of those places had led her here in any way she could have predicted. She thought about her grandmother's oxtail recipe and the way a smell could reach someone in the dark. She thought about a man who hadn't slept properly in a year and a Bluetooth speaker on a kitchen counter and the specific, unrepeatable thing that happened when you fed someone with your whole heart. She did not leave. She fell asleep too, eventually. Right there on the couch, with the Seoul skyline doing its thing outside, and Soju the cat emerging cautiously from the bathroom to inspect the situation, deciding it was acceptable, and settling on the armchair nearby. Park Young-jun came in at 6 in the morning, took one look at the two of them, turned directly around, and walked back out. He stood in the hallway for a moment, then he smiled, just a small one, to himself, where nobody could see. When Ji-young woke up, Zara was already in the kitchen. He could hear her moving, the quiet sounds of someone who knew her way around a space, water running, something on the stove. He could smell coffee. He sat there for a moment before he got up, in the particular stillness of a man who has woken up to something unfamiliar and is deciding, very slowly, that it might be okay. He went to the kitchen doorway. She was making eggs. She looked up at him. How long? He asked. 8 hours, she said. Something in his face did something private and complicated and enormous. He sat down on the stool. She put coffee in front of him. You stayed, he said. I fell asleep, she clarified. It wasn't noble. Your couch is just extremely comfortable. He looked at the coffee. It's the most comfortable couch I own, and I have never once fallen asleep on it. That's because you weren't relaxed. I wasn't relaxed last night either. You were more relaxed than usual. He looked up at her. She was plating the eggs with the kind of focused care she brought to everything she made, and she was also, he noticed, trying not to smile. Zara, he said. Ji-young, she said back, and she had never used his first name before, and they both noticed, and neither of them said anything about it. I would like you to come back tonight, he said. I'll be here at 9, she said. I know, he said. I wanted to ask anyway. She put the eggs in front of him. She met his eyes for exactly 1 second before she turned back to the stove. But she was smiling now. He ate his eggs. Outside the window, Seoul was waking up, loud and bright and completely indifferent to the fact that something small and irreversible had just happened in a penthouse kitchen between a girl from Atlanta with a cast-iron skillet and a man who had forgotten how to rest, and the food that had, quietly, impossibly, found the one way through. Nobody warns you about that. Nobody warns you that the thing that saves someone isn't always what you'd expect. That sometimes it's a bowl of oxtail stew and a Bluetooth speaker and the willingness to stay. That sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is also the one most desperate to be known by someone who isn't afraid. Nobody warned Zara Collins, but she stayed anyway. And that, as it turned out, was the whole story. If this story found you, it was meant to. Drop a comment telling me which moment got you, because I already know which one it was. Don't lie. Subscribe right now, hit the notification bell, because we are just getting started, and Zara and Ji-young have a lot more story left to tell. Like this video if you felt something, and I will see you in the next one.